offense, and then males in turn would evolve further, more sophisticated offenses. Let me give you an example of this kind of thing. Male sexual persistence. Male sexual persistence, if it gets too extreme, can hurt women in their fitness, basically in their reproductive success. It can be bad for women. Okay, that is because in some cases, extreme sexual persistence circumvents one of the most fundamental strategies that women have in mating, which is known as female choice. Okay, given how much they invest metabolically in order to produce offspring, females have evolved to be very choosy or selective or discerning about who they mate with, because it can be very costly to mate with the wrong guy, and whereas it can be very beneficial to mate with the right guy. So basically, that is going to select for female. And so now I have to turn to women, because women are not exempt from unsavory forms of behavior. Okay, there could be female-initiated deception. Once there exists in male minds the sexual overperception bias, it can be exploited by women for their own benefits. And so what I mean by this, an example, prototypic example that I think of is one that a woman herself told me about as a female friend. And she said that when she drops her car off at the car mechanic, she smiles at the guy. And she knows exactly what's going on. Now, what is going on in the auto mechanic's mind? Does the auto mechanic, she wants to have sex with me? Well, probably not. He doesn't think, okay, she's going to have sex with me. But see, what you have to understand is that in the male mind, if the probability of having sex goes from 0% to 1.5%, he's willing to give her better service on the car. So basically, she can exploit that sexual overperception bias in order to extract resources of various kinds for her own benefit. And if men are perpetually deceived in these ways, that's going to create male adaptations, male defenses against this form of what I call sexual deception, and that a similar or analogous coevolutionary process will occur. So these are, I guess, two examples. One, falsely imply sex to extract resources. We predict that men will get upset about this kind of sexual deception. So some people say, well, maybe women are just more easily upset than men. Maybe women are very emotional. Well, what we predict is that no, there's some domains in which men will be more upset than women in very specific ways. Another is what I call the bait and switch tactic. So this is imply costless sex, and then the woman intercalates herself into the man's mind over time until one day he wakes up and realizes he cannot live without her. And as far as we know, there are no known defenses against this strategy. Well, in our study of experiences of deception, more men than women do in fact report being deceived in these ways, and they get more upset about it. So led me to believe that sex was forthcoming but said no at the last minute. Men would be more upset about that than women, or misled him about her willingness to have sex. So again, there are domains in which men are more easily upsettable than women. They're very predictable from sexual strategies theory. Okay, so some brief conclusions here before I shift topics. Okay, first we have sex-linked deceptive strategies. Both sexes engage in forms of deception, but they're different forms of deception. Two, there are sex-linked emotional reactions, presumably co-evolved defenses to prevent strategic interference. That is, when you get upset, that motivates you to do something to prevent either the current or future episodes of that kind of interference, each corresponding precisely to the recurrent adaptive problems that men and women confront and have confronted. Okay, so now, want to shift gears here to a little, even more of a dark side of human mating, which, by the way, I've written a couple papers on love too, and talk about love in my book. So I'm just focusing on the conflictual elements in this particular talk. So it's not like I have a totally pessimistic view of human nature. Yes, we do torture each other, but we have a bright and loving side as well. I'm just not going to talk about it today. Okay, sexual coercion. It's a very unpleasant thing, but male sexual coercion, as I mentioned, it interferes with one of the cardinal strategies of women, and that is choice of partner, female choice. So, in our studies, we've looked at various forms of sexual coercion. So he touched my body without my permission. He physically restrained me in order to kiss me. He tried to force sex acts on me, insisted on sexual relations, or forced me to have sex. Just different, kind of increasingly escalating forms of sexual coercion. And again, we expect a similar kind of coevolutionary logic. This kind of sexual aggression in men should select for defenses in women to prevent being the victims of sexual coercion or sexual aggression, and men should develop more sophisticated forms of sexual aggression or other means to circumvent those defenses. How upsetting is sexual aggression? It is extremely upsetting, and both sexes know this. In this particular study, we simply had those 5 acts of sexual aggression that I described a minute ago, and we asked men and women, well, how upset would a woman be, so in this case a female victim, if a man did these things to her? He touched her body without her permission, tried to force sex on her, etc. Okay, and then we asked both men and women, well, how upset would a man be if a woman did these things to him? And as you can see, not surprisingly, both sexes understand that these things are very upsetting to women, although this turns out to be statistically significantly different. And the way I interpret that is that men underestimate how upsetting these things are to women. Interestingly, what we find here is another sex difference in perceptions, and the way I interpret this is that women overestimate how upsetting these things are to men. In fact, some men wrote on these things, well, if I were the victim of a woman touching my body without my permission, etc., I wouldn't be upset at all. That would turn me on, you know. So they said, why don't you give us negative numbers so I could, you know, not at all upset. But again, there's this interesting region where you have exactly the same actions, but males and females are perceiving them differently. They're failing to correctly read the minds of the opposite sex, or read in this case, the emotions of the opposite sex. Okay, now I want to shift to sexual conflict during a mateship. And I have to introduce one more conceptual complexity, and that's the notion of triadic antagonistic coevolution, which is kind of a mouthful, but it's fairly easily explained, and that is the fact that mating does not occur in a social vacuum. It's not just one male and one female. Often there are third parties involved.